So we're talking about the whole path. And so far we have talked about, as you know, using this packaging of the teaching, just to remind us. Traditionally, the lamas would present the teaching, then they'd say it again, and they'd say it a third time, each time slightly shorter. So we'll just do an overview. So with the first point, we've looked at how we've got a beginningless mind. This is important for us modern people who have a very different view. So we need to be reminded from the start that the mind is not what we're discussing is not the development of the brain. It will develop, definitely, but we're developing our mind, which is, as far as Buddhists are concerned, will develop your brain, not the other way around. Well, possible. Anyway, we're developing the mind. So we start with knowing our mind is beginningless. It's not physical. It's not the handiwork of somebody else. It's not from a creator, not from mummy and daddy, not from nothing. It's a continuity. This is our hypothesis here. So then given that, then we can think about this marvelous potential it's got. So then the next point is Tsongkhapa's point in the 14th century, given that, this is uncharted territory, to becoming a Buddha, developing this mind of ours, my goodness, we need decent teachers. I mean, it's sort of evident. Because they talk in such a kind of holy way in the teachings about a spiritual teacher called a guru, heavy with qualities, that's all it needs, that's what it means. We kind of mystify it a bit. But I mean, think of anything you've ever learned. The best way to learn it is from someone who knows how to do it. That's a knowledge holder, a lovely word in Tibetan, rigsin, a knowledge holder. We all need knowledge holders, It's the obvious thing. So clearly, like in any body of knowledge, but particularly here, because it's uncharted territory, we better check very carefully, And because we're sentimental and ridiculous, because we're so silly and sentimental about spiritual teachings, we better check all the more carefully. Use our intelligence, not our sentimental nonsense, And then, of course, the teachings are quite vast on this. Tsongkhapa goes into in great detail how you check, how you find a teacher, and having found, how you commit. I mean, we went into it very briefly. This is crucial. Now, the next step, our teacher then gets us to, he wants to prime our mind to even want to begin to practice by getting us to think. It's like doing a bit of market research, really, checking the world and ticking the boxes and realizing we're in a very small category of really fortunate people. So the essence of it is, he lists about 18 points, but the essence of it is, recognizing that the conclusion always is the action point. What's the action point? The action point is, well, I better not waste this precious opportunity. I mean, it's pretty rare to have a reasonable life, a reasonable body, a reasonable mind, not completely berserk, reasonable conditions, which give us the leisure, the miracle of leisure that we can then investigate and practice a spiritual path. That's the idea, So that then a teacher wants to prime our mind even more. So his agenda is to increase our wake-up call. So we now enter into junior school grade 1, and now our teacher gets us. He takes all Buddha's teachings about impermanence, and he gets us to think about how this precious life could finish. It will finish at any moment, and we don't know when. So this next point is we think about impermanence. It's very extensive teachings in Buddhism about impermanence, particularly subtle impermanence, which can be really confused with emptiness. It's so marvelous. But here our teacher's agenda is just to think about death in particular, to give us the wake-up call to increase our wish not to waste this precious life, these precious resources. Then the next point that a teacher wants us to think about, Tsongkhapa wants us to think about, given that my mind is a beginningless continuity of mental moments, and given that I will die, no idea when, but there are lots of options of rebirths, and lots of them are quite suffering. So here, from all the extensive view from the Buddha's view of the universe, about all the different realms of existence, the different kinds of sentient beings, and so on and so forth, here we concentrate, which is a very weird one for us in our culture, thinking of the likely possibility of having a suffering rebirth. And then the action point is, well, thank you very much, I don't want further suffering. But not only just a rebirth, we can equally look into this life of ours now. We can recognize very clearly we don't want to be killed, lied to, stolen from, jumped on by the wrong person, poor, living in a war zone. We know we don't want that kind of suffering. Absolutely do not. So that increases our wish not to waste this precious life. Then the next point is, whom can I turn to give me the methods, that I can get in charge of this process and not have a suffering rebirth and not have future suffering. I don't want future suffering. Thank you very much. Then this is now where we take refuge. We rely upon the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. We looked at that in brief, what a Buddha is, what the Dharma is, what the Sangha is. And again, it's like the teacher one, use your noggin, use your intelligence, check up on the Buddha, check up on his teachings, to see if they're valid, even reasonably. And of course you check up on the people who practice it. That helps you. That's like the teacher. So then, now the next step, now we finally get to practice. All this is priming our mind. Each of these points we contemplate are priming our mind to get to where we start to put our money where our mouth is. And here now we learn about karma. The practice is abiding by the laws of karma. So given that I don't want future suffering, and given that the law of karma runs the universe, that everything I think and do and say produces my future, I'm the producer of myself, so I'd better start getting a handle on this and learning this law so I can be in charge. So we abide by the laws of karma. So this is where we go into detail about the basic level of practice in Buddhism, which is the essence of this first scope of practice, or as I like to call it, junior school. Everything leads to this point. We abide by the laws of karma. Why would you want to do that? Because you don't want future suffering. This is the main energy behind this level of practice. There's no wriggle room, there's no compassion much talking yet. This is all about compassion for yourself. Like I said, we often miss that in our culture. That sounds like selfish to us. We've got to take care of this first. Put ourselves together. Start disciplining our body, speech, and mind. Or our body and speech initially here. So then we would take refuge. Then we might eventually take the layperson's vows. And then we add on to our daily practice purifying the past karma. So the first level of practice, as Lama Zopa says, entry level, junior school, grade 1, right this second, is do not harm other sentient beings. Why not, Buddha? Because that's not going to harm you. That's it. And so now, not only do we stop putting more weeds into the ground, we've got to put atomic bombs under the weeds we've already planted in the past, given that our mind is beginningless, as nutty as that sounds, so suffering doesn't, so we'll stop them ripening as more suffering. This is the fundamentals of a good practice. Abide by the laws of karma, take refuge, do your bit of practice every day, purify at the end of every day. That's it. That's the essence. And what's the conclusion from this? You can guarantee, because karma is a natural law, that you will get another decent human rebirth and keep on practicing your spiritual path. The very minimum result of junior school practice. But we can go further. We can go to the next level, and now we can get to the root of the problem. We actually now can become a Buddhist. This is where we really abide. We really look into the mind, become our own therapist, as Lama Yeshe says. This is becoming an actual Buddhist. Ethics is shared by any decent person on this planet. But this is in the second level of practice, where we start to look more deeply into the Four Noble Truths and want to get into the root of the problem which is our mind. And we look into the 3 poisons, in particular attachment. So then we looked into that in detail, I think last week. And maybe the week before as well, I can't remember. We understand attachment. And this is profound, because these words are cute enough, but we do not have the same analysis that Buddha has, and his analysis is very precise. So we need to learn the definitions of these things. We need to know we've got virtuous states of mind. We need to learn to know that we've got non-virtuous states of mind, and our crucial job is to distinguish between them. That's the unique job of being a Buddhist, using Buddhist psychology, And why do you do this? Because you don't want further suffering. You want to go deeper and uproot the suffering. So here the second result is you give up attachment. You get renunciation. So what would you be like from these levels of practice? It sounds very forbidding to live in according to ethics and don't kill and don't steal and don't jump on too many partners and don't eat too much cake and control your attachment. It sounds kind of depressing to us. But actually, the kind of person you'll be, I'll tell you, you'll be far more steady. You'll have much more equanimity within yourself. You'll be less up and down like a yo-yo. You'll be less fearful, less neurotic, less angry, less attached, less jealous, less anxious, more confident, more self-confident, more fulfilled. Is that not what we want? This is Buddha's methods for how to get happy, even relatively. By controlling your body, your speech, and your mind. We are in charge. We have to learn that we are in charge. This is Buddha's unique approach. There's no concept of a Buddha, of a creator. There's no concept of a punishment or reward. No dynamic like that in Buddhism. We are the boss. We rely upon the Buddha, no question. But we do the work. We produce the person we become. So this brings an incredible sense of responsibility, Now, the next level of practice, we now go to the compassion wing. If we graduated at high school, if we graduated at the second scope, we'd be on the Hinayana path, the Theravadan path. We would continue our practice, and now we would bring shamatha and concentration, meditation, and emptiness into the mix. We would get concentration. We would then eventually realize emptiness, cut the root of samsara, and one life or another, you'll achieve your own nirvana, your own cessation of suffering. And honey, you are out of here. You will not come back. But you can do more. We're on the Mahayana path. We might even achieve all that, but we are motivated. We want to be motivated by the wish to become a Buddha. So now we move to the compassion wing. And that's the one we have to talk to today. Is that right, Marianne? The compassion wing.
Yes.
Okay, good. There's a lot to talk about in our last day. We might have to go over the 90 minutes. We'll see how we go. Okay. So the main emphasis in the first level of practice, it's called, one way of framing it all, it's called the ethics or the morality. These are synonymous. The ethics of refraining from harming. It's the ethics of restraint. The whole emphasis of this first stage of practice is super concerned with your controlling your body, speech, and mind. Why? Because you do not want further suffering. That's the basis of this whole practice. You've got to get that deeply and strongly. You've got to be fed up with suffering. You've got to know you're in charge. You've got to learn the laws of karma, learn the laws of the mind. And these are the tools we use to put ourselves together. Never underestimate this. Because the point here is, now this qualifies us to start to look into the world and go, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. And you don't see that before because you're so overwhelmed by your own rubbish. You can't see past your own nose. Now we can see past our own noses. Now we can see the benefit of practice. Now we understand what causes suffering and how to get rid of it. We're already practicing it. This gives us great confidence. And we realize this is a model that refers to every single sentient being. Every ant, every monkey, every dog, every human. So this gives us the courage to think, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. So we continue the job. We never stop this all the way to Buddhahood. We continue the job of working on our body, speech, and mind. We never stop that. But now this whole level of practice is called the practice of the morality of helping others. This first lot is you playing safe. Back off, leave people alone, mind your own business. You're the beneficiary. Now we've got some control, so now we can begin to continue to work on our mind, continue to get rid of attachment, jealousy, and all the nonsense. But it's in relation to breaking down the barriers that ego grasping and the nonsense have created between self and other. This is the compassion approach. So it's far more advanced. I mean, we talk about compassion, we think of compassion, oh, so lovely, oh, well, have compassion for animals, or have compassion for children. I'm sorry to tell you, that's not difficult. But that's just a miniature percentage of the capacity we've got for compassion. And this is the point, as His Holiness says, compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom, which is the wisdom wing. And what that means quite literally, it's nothing cosmic, is that when you're caught up in your own misery, when you're caught up in your own delusions, and your own depression and anxiety and worries and fears, you cannot see past your own nose. It is so obvious. We see vaguely suffering out there, but it's very limited. And when we're in that mode of jealousy and attachment and fears and worries, we only have compassion for a very small group of people. Our beloveds and people who are innocent victims, and we're not going to find many of them, probably a few animals and a few children. I mean, I'm being slightly sarcastic, but get my point. I mean, we do not have compassion for a rat. We'll kill it as soon as possible. But we have compassion for a little poodle woodle. I mean, excuse me, we should be embarrassed at our attachment and our self-centeredness. We select a few animals that make us happy, and we have compassion for them. We get all upset about them when they get hurt. But when the rats get hurt, we are happy. I mean, we're so limited because our compassion now is limited. It's only for a few people, and it's driven by attachment. When we start to understand the level of compassion that the Buddhist path talks about, it's mind-boggling, you know. I remember a couple of years ago when I was in Santa Fe, Rinpoche was here, and I had to see him about his book I was doing, and he said, do you teach about compassion? Bodhichitta? And I kind of blurted out, Rinpoche, it's too heavy, I can't cope. I mean, I mean that when we start to talk about it, I get so intense. Give me emptiness any day. I'm happy to talk about emptiness. I feel very comfortable talking about emptiness. But compassion, bodhicitta, it's outrageous. We don't think of it like that. We think of it all soft and gooey. Don't be ridiculous. So, in the next stage of practice, the next level of realization is called getting bodhicitta. The first realization from the first two is getting renunciation. And by the way, just the criterion, as Lama Zopa puts it, the criterion of having accomplished renunciation, please wait for this, is that just the thought of another moment of attachment is so repulsive, it's like being in a septic tank. So clearly, way to go. So we'd be very humble, okay? Way to go to get rid of attachment. We live in attachment. It's our default mode. In fact, the Buddha's description of attachment, as we talked about, is what we would call totally normal human behavior. So Buddha's much more radical in his assessment of what is mental illness. Quite seriously. It's a good term. I think I'm sure I talked about this last week. So we are now more capable. Once we've understood what suffering is, we realize that it refers to everybody. Once we realize that everybody is the cause of their own suffering, it completely shifts your view of the universe. So even without much work now, because you understand karma from yourself, when you see the dog being kicked, without even much work on compassion, but understanding karma, and you know it refers to everybody, you see the dog being kicked. The usual view before we worked on our mind would be, oh, the poor little dog, how dare that wicked man harm that little innocent dog, and we'd punch the fellow in the nose. But now, understanding karma, you look at it and you go, oh my God, the poor dog must have caused this. And then you go, oh my God, that poor fellow, he is going to suffer in the future. So bodhisattvas eventually, we're going to describe this, bodhisattvas eventually have more compassion for the bad ones, for the psychopaths, for the weirdos, for the terrorists. Because why? Based on this view of karma, which really takes us time to think about, the person who's experiencing the suffering now has just finished that karma. The person doing the harm has just begun a whole new cycle of intense future suffering. This is a very, very different view, and you will not have that view unless you do the first scope and second scope and understand karma, because this is the basis of valid compassion, the way Buddhism describes it. It's much vaster, and it's for everybody. Because from the point of view of karma, and that's a way of putting it, this is our language, there's no such thing as an innocent victim. That's heavy for us. Because our compassion depends on having a person who deserves our compassion, which means they've got to be a nice person. Think about it. Nothing to do with it for the Buddha. Everybody's in the same boat. We're all as blind as bats, blaming everybody else for our suffering, blaming everybody else for our happiness, and continuing, because of that, perpetuating our suffering, continuing to dig our graves deeper into suffering. This is the basis of incredible compassion for every single sentient being. And you can't possibly have that view if you haven't done through the karma one yourself. This is why the wisdom wing's necessary, you know. So anyway, the next level of realization is to accomplish bodhichitta. This is on the compassion wing. So here, there are two main techniques that are described in the Lamrim. One is called the 7-point cause and effect, or something, a 7-point mind training, or the 1 cause and 6 effects, something like that. And the other one is called exchanging self for others, which is the more radical approach. So in Pabonka Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, this Lamrim text that Rinpoche is Rinpoche's favorite, Lama Zopa's favorite, there's a way he presents a combination of these two techniques together, and there's 11 little techniques, and the 11th is the culmination, bodhicitta. So these are like bullet points of techniques that one would spend years in meditation accomplishing, not just getting a nice feeling for it, but learning to make this your view of the universe. So all these meditations are all conceptual. They're all intellectual meditations. They're all thinking meditations. They're all using logic and analysis to break down ego's misconceptions, because ego's views are very entrenched. You can't be gentle with them. You've got to use a lot of logic to smash the misconceptions. This is a very serious point, So the very first one of these practices, the very first practice, the foundation, is the development of equanimity. Equanimity has got different uses in Buddhism, but here in the Mahayana path, it's specifically referring to once you've got it, this heartfelt recognition that friend, enemy, and stranger, and from the point of view of the 3 poisons, which we learn about in high school, these are the objects of the 3 poisons in terms of being sentient beings. We also got cakes and tables and other things are the object of our 3 poisons, objects of attachment, object of aversion. But here it's sentient beings. So the whole universe can be divided very comfortably into the 3 categories of sentient beings, and you will find there is no 4th category. There are those we are attached to, let's call them friend, good enough. There are those we have aversion for, maybe have violent anger towards. Maybe they've really harmed us terribly. We hate them. Maybe we hate certain politicians. We have aversion for the next category, and they're called enemies. So we mightn't use that term, but it's a good enough term to use for this contemplation. And even as I'm talking, you imagine in front of you, to the left, your beloved, a person you're very attached to right now, and then the person right eyeball to eyeball whom you do not like. I mean, we won't say we have enemies, but we have people we don't like. It's guaranteed. People at work who annoy us, the next door neighbor, even our sister, she might just annoy us. That's called enemy. She's good enough for enemy. She's the object of aversion. The third category is called strangers. And who are they? 99.999% of the universe. And why? What is a stranger? By definition, a person who has neither harmed nor helped us. A friend helps us, an enemy harms us, and a stranger does neither. So how do we feel about them? They could all drop dead. They don't affect my life at all. And this is a fact. I mean, we read all the papers and things these days when we know the world much more than we might have even 50 years ago. It's just right in front of us. But still, strangers. I always tell this ridiculous little story. Maybe you've heard it before, but I was reading my iPad, my New York Times, and on the home page, the right-hand corner, there was a heading down there on the right-hand corner, and the heading said, 350 people die in a ferry accident in Tasmania. Well, that's my people, right? That's Australia. I went, oh no. And I looked at the story, about to read it, and then I noticed it said Tanzania. And I went, oh, that's okay. And then, of course, I noticed myself being indifferent. So, of course, I read the story and had compassion. But, I don't know about Tanzania. Where's Tanzania? Africa, maybe? Yeah, maybe. I don't know a Tanzanian. They don't touch my heart. We're all like this, even though we're nice people, because we just think friend, enemy, stranger is normal behavior. And yes, for Buddha's analysis, it is, because the three poisons, attachment, aversion, and ignorance, are the three root delusions that drive everything, This is universal. Monkeys have them, dogs, everybody in the universe has friends, enemies, and strangers, So the first step of practice, what we're aiming for is to make this paradigm shift in our mind from the shift from cherishing ourselves to cherishing others. So the key, all the way up to bodhicitta, the 11th of these 11 points, the key problem at this level of practice is actually called self-cherishing, and that's the Tibetan's term for what we would say is selfishness. So we know it's very embarrassing to be accused of being selfish, So selfish means you put yourself first. So of course in our culture, being neurotic and having low self-esteem and being miserable and factoring all this as normal, then we think with a certain level of selfish, we think you can't go beyond. We've all got to be a little bit selfish, otherwise we'd be mentally ill. Buddha's view is completely different. So in the first stages of practice, the main enemy is called attachment. Here, it's framed differently. It's called putting me first. And of course, if attachment is implied, it's because of attachment to get what I want that I goes first. This is natural. So here, the enemy we're trying to conquer all the way to bodhicitta, where we then make this paradigm shift. Where now, this is some lifetimes of work, if not countless years of intense meditation to finally get to bodhicitta, where the criterion of success in bodhicitta, there are two main things. One is that you only now think of others. I mean, there's many, many criteria. But one criterion is that you no longer have a thought of I, the usual I that plays the normal roles in the middle of us. This seems very bizarre to us, not comfortable. But this is exactly what all these teachings are about. You no longer ever think of ever asking for anything. It wouldn't even occur to you. You don't suppress it. It just wouldn't occur to you. Because you only have others in your mind. That normal sense of I is no longer there. This is hard to conceptualize, hard to imagine this, but this is the point. So you've made this extraordinary shift. And this is not just some whimsical thought that comes and goes. We're talking about a genuine realization, So the bodhicitta is the culmination, but to get to that, we've got to develop essentially love and compassion. These are the two fundamental virtues that are the essence of the entire path, of this path. Love is defined as a delight in someone else's happiness. May you be happy. Whatever makes you happy, you delight in someone's happiness. You want them to be happy. That's the definition of love. We recognize that. And then the definition of compassion is you see suffering and you go, oh my God, look at that suffering. This is unbearable. I wish you did not suffer. So love and compassion, they're like flip sides, This is the essence of all the positive qualities. And the development of these to outrageous degrees finally culminate as bodhicitta. This incredible aspiration to only be a benefit to others every millisecond of the day. And the long-term goal is you're heading towards your Buddhahood. And you do this from life to life to life, because we'll go to the next stage after we get bodhicitta. The final stages of our practice is the 6 perfections. We go from life, once you've got bodhicitta, you bop along from life after life after life, connecting with sentient beings and practicing the first 4 perfections, which is generosity, morality, patience, and perseverance in relation to sentient beings. And then on your cushion, you are perfecting the last 2, which is concentration and wisdom, realizing emptiness. Everything is programmed gradually like this, So bodhicitta, equanimity is a crucial state of mind. We need to get this. This is the foundation upon which we build valid love and compassion, and therefore bodhicitta. And without this, it's not stable. So what is it? Well, look at us now. Let's say, my friend, my enemy, my stranger. I will say to my beloved, I love you. We actually mean I'm attached to you and I love you. There's 2 things there. But we think they're the same. But attachment is I-based. We've learned about it in high school. It's neurotic, it's greedy, it's hungry, it's needy, it's childish. I'm not trying to be horrible. But the irony is, because we do have love and compassion, that tempers our attachment, and so we don't notice our attachment so much. We only notice the attachment when it's really fierce. When you look at really mean people, their attachment is naked because they don't have much love and compassion. But it's much harder, ironically, to see our own attachment because we think we're nice people, and we are nice people relatively, but our attachment pollutes our love and compassion. There's no question. It drags it down. It limits them. So that's what we've got to work first, and getting rid of lessening the attachment in the first stages of practice. So the equanimity one is really crucial. So what it is this. Right now, I will say, I love you to my friend. So then I analyze that and I realize that that is true. I do want them to be happy. I do have compassion, but it's, as Lama Zopa says, it's unstable. As we would say, it's got strings attached. And what are they? That's attachment. So we all know you fall in love with your boyfriend, then 6 months later you can't stand the sight of each other. We all know that. It happens. Sometimes it happens, and you might not leave each other. You might try and be nice again, but we all know. And so what's going on is very simple. I did love you in the beginning, but I never factored in the attachment part. And what that means is this massive emotional hunger in me that believes you're going to make me happy. So I've got this massive vested interest in saying I love you. And as long as you keep fulfilling my attachment's needs, then I am prepared to continue to want you to be happy. I know this sounds very brutal, but this is the analysis we need to do. Because look, let's face it, let's say Fred starts being mean to me, abusing me, lying to me, cheating on me. Nobody would blame me if I ended up having aversion for him, and nobody would blame me if I stopped loving him, because that's the world. People would understand, well, of course Robina doesn't love him anymore. Look what a creep he is. But this is the usual logic we have for love. It's contingent on attachment. It's contingent on you doing what I want. It's contingent upon you satisfying my needs. That's the way we have love in our culture. And we call it normal. Well, Buddha says it's better than nothing, but I'm sorry, honey, it's really polluted. So the logic ego uses now, which is illogic, for why do I say I love you? I love you, Fred, because you make me happy. But what we're trying to do with equanimity is get this clear recognition that my friend and my enemy and my stranger are actually equal in their wish in themselves to be happy, their wish in themselves to not want to suffer. So what equanimity is the basis for gradually building upon that, this clear wish that I want everybody to be happy. Why? Not because they make me happy, but because they want to be happy. We get that that's love. When a parent, when the child goes off and does the weirdest things and that make them happy but don't make the parents happy, but if the parents are halfway reasonable, they'd be sad, but they will say, whatever makes you happy, darling. That's love. It's so clear. And you see it in the other way. Parents who are completely freaked out when the child doesn't do what they wish, and they manipulate the child and the child gets guilty and all this. We know this. It's such a classic story. That's because the love is mixed with attachment. So we're trying to shift that here with equanimity. We're trying to see the logic that enemy, friend, and stranger, from their point of view, not from mine, from their point of view, each of them wants to be happy. Each of them doesn't want to suffer. That's the precise meaning of equanimity. Not more than that. That's exactly what it is. And we learn to gradually grow that. So then we grow upon it. So the next one, there's a series of techniques, and some of these sound so peculiar to us. But the next one, what time is it? Okay. The next one is, in this series of little techniques, you need your calculator for this next one. It sounds hilarious. Everybody, every sentient being has been your mum. I mean, this is really hilarious. And the Dalai Lama always gets people asking him questions because we all think our mums are the cause of our suffering. We wonder why. What am I getting me to think everybody's been my mum, God. It's because the mother, coming from the Asian idea, a mother is considered a person who loves you and takes care of you and has nurtured you. So if that doesn't work for you, as His Holiness says, well, you think of your father. You think of anybody who's nurtured you. We're using it as an example. And if you can think of one person who's done that, then everybody's done that for you. So this idea is that all sentient beings whose minds are beginningless, you bumped into each other countless times, and each of them has been my mother, been kind to me. That's the logic. One has to think that through. Now the third point is the conclusion. The next point is we're going to try and prove to ourselves with logic and analysis and meditation that the mother is kind. In fact, this third one, there are 2 points, 3A and 3B. 3A is the mother is kind. That needs some thinking. We've got so many assumptions, don't we? So right now, let's say you do love your mother. Some people get along with their mums and they think they're adorable and they really love their mother. They really appreciate their mother. They remember everything their mother has done. That's the good example. But we might have a mother who's been a bit neurotic, who's been a bit guilty, maybe was an alcoholic, maybe was a mean mother. That's perfectly possible. But we're so shocked by that in the West because we have this default assumption, which is just the assumption of attachment, that somehow because my mother made me, she should be a perfect mother. I don't know why you should assume that, but we do. That's why we love to hate our mothers, love to blame our mothers, It's completely ridiculous. She's just a human being like you. We all have this deep assumption she should be perfect. It's so peculiar. So anyway, we might have a mother who was really neurotic. I understand. We're all neurotic. So then we think my mother's been kind. No, I'm sorry, Robina. No, my mother was not kind to me. So I think even if she was neurotic, even if she was mean to you, this is a very powerful analysis to do, a very powerful contemplation. Because you're going to see there's plenty of reasons to think of her kindness. Because we know when we have lots of attachment and lots of aversion, with anybody, first you think they're gorgeous, and then suddenly as you get to know each other, whether it's your friend or your boyfriend, you start to find fault. And before you know it, you keep getting angry and more fault, and one day, even just your girlfriend around the corner who goes to work with you, you can't stand the sight of her. Why? Because your attachment before just saw the nice things, and now your aversion and your anger only sees the ugly things. We do that to the entire world, and we do that to our mums, So this is a powerful practice, especially if your mother's been horrible. Maybe you're not ready for it, but it's very powerful and it's scientific logic, okay? So what do? You think of some of the things she did. I mean, your mother, if she bore you, she was you're in her womb for several months. She gave birth to you. She wiped your little bottom. She tied your shoe, what do you call them? Your shoelaces. She did all these things for you, and not, if say she does. But let's say your mother didn't. Let's say, I always use this example. Let's say your mother gave you away. This is for the world, this is an absolutely logical reason to absolutely think your mother was not kind. Well, I'm sorry, you're wrong. I had an abortion when I was 23. I killed my baby. Lots of women do. I'm not trying to be brutal here. It's just a fact. I'm just using blunt words. So your mother didn't abort you. You won the lottery. You got a person who didn't abort you. I know many people I know one person the same age as me at the same time. She refused to have an abortion. She was 17 in the 1960s. She was going to lose the boyfriend. She was going to get a bad reputation. She decided she wouldn't have an abortion. She gave the girl away. Now this girl can't stand her mother because she has all that view, well, my mother gave me away. But all I know is that person suffered terribly. But she didn't have an abortion. So that means you should be weeping in happiness every time you think your mother decided not to kill you. I'm not joking now. This is true. But we never think that way because we only see it through the lenses of our own needs. So the mother, and this is a powerful way to just make you want to have a different view of anybody, You know yourself when someone only sees your bad qualities. If you're a mother and the daughter only sees your bad qualities, you know how heartbreaking it is. because you know it's not the whole story. And that's the real point here. So it's an incredibly profound practice to do, very humbling, to think of your mother. Don't go to her necessarily, and think of the good things she did. She gave birth to you. She fed you. She educated you. Yes, she might be mean. I'm not arguing with that. But she had other qualities too. It's very profound to do this. It softens you, and then you begin to paint a new picture of your mum. Now, the second point here, 3B, is more profound, but initially sounds really ridiculous. It goes, every sentient being is kind to me. This is easy to prove, but it's not what we mean by kindness. And with the mother as well, let me just explain what I mean here. When we mean kind, we think of a person who is gentle and loving and who thinks of me and does what I want. So especially the one who does what I want. If anybody does what I want, I think they're kind. Or you go to the cafe, you order your chocolate cake, you get an extra mound of cream and a discount. Even if the waitress is thinking you're a big fat old Buddhist nun and jokes about you behind your back, I don't know that, and I don't care because I get what I want. I'll call her kind. This is why attachment is so insidious. If a person does what you want, you'll smile at them because they're doing what you want. That's not kind. What we mean by kind here is that a person does anything at all for you. The fact that they do it. The fact that they do anything for you. So here the logic is this. It's really based on dependent arising. That you think of anything since you were conceived, even the body you've got, but from the time you came out of your mother's womb up to now, there's not a single thing that has happened in your life, that has helped your life, that has facilitated your life, that isn't the handiwork of countless sentient beings, and including the death of countless sentient beings. This is a fact. It's dependent arising. I just think of my pair of socks. They keep my feet warm. They're nicely designed. They're a good color. They're made the way I like. But I think of all the people who made those socks. These are facts, They didn't think of Robina. They didn't make socks for Robina. They might have been, the person, and this is the point here, it could have been somebody in India where they made the socks, and the guy could have been a pedophile. For all I know, that's not the issue here. We're trying to see that everything we have is the handiwork of many sentient beings. You can't disprove this. This is truth. This is evident to anybody. So then you think, well, that's just their job. Why do you mean they're kind? What it means is the fact that I've got it, the fact that they did it. Without them, I'd have cold feet. Without the wool here and the little animals who gave it, without the house, without the food, the flowers, the floor, the couch, with the computer, everything we have is the handiwork of countless millions of sentient beings. So the attitude here is to open our hearts and have some genuine gratitude that but for them I wouldn't even exist. This is provable fact, but we don't think of it like that. This is a profound meditation when you really do it deeply, that everything you see, it's the handiwork of sentient beings, and so you are grateful to them. They might be creeps. Like I said, there could have been a pedophile who designed this lamp. That's not the issue here. This is a specific approach to help us open our hearts, to take off our own attachment glasses, which is the way through which we see everything now, and learn to recognize that everything is the handiwork of sentient beings. How incredible. This is a profound point, but we just never think of it, So the fourth point is the conclusion. I must repay the kindness of all these sentient beings. People spend years in retreat on these things, not just thinking it once, The next lot are gradually taking from the exchanging self for others mixture of practices, which are much more radical. There's a quicker method, So there's a series of techniques here, but they culminate in tonglen. We can't go into much detail. They culminate in tonglen. So this, for some reason in our culture, is a very popular practice, although it's extremely advanced, it's extraordinary. But for some reason, lots of Westerners love it. I'm always amazed. So this is where we make that paradigm shift. We do a series of other techniques trying to put others first, and this is where we're developing love and compassion. So let me talk about those for a second. Love is, as I said before, an aspiration, a delight in someone else's happiness. Compassion is an empathy with someone else's suffering. I know in the world they use different definitions for empathy and compassion, but here effectively we're discussing the same thing. Seeing someone else's suffering and wishing they didn't have it. But there's another level of compassion here that is unique to the bodhisattva level of compassion. It's called great compassion. Or there's another level of it too, and I get a bit confused, these two, I think they're used synonymously. Lama Zopa says it, is the term is the special attitude. So what this is this great compassion, maha karuna. It's a technical term in Sanskrit. And it's compassion is, oh my God, look at that suffering. Great compassion is where you, as His Holiness calls it, universal responsibility. This is powerful feeling of it's my job. And what great compassion says is, what can I do to fix it? That's great compassion. I mean, compassion itself is stupendous. You see the suffering, you feel empathy, you wish it wasn't there, but this is not enough. You've got to have the action. And this is the unique characteristic of the bodhisattva. This is the precise point upon which the bodhisattva path exists. This powerful sense of universal responsibility, the fearless, the courageous attitude of the bodhisattva, that it's their job. It's like their job description. It's like a mother. You know, the mother's on the beach with her kid, and the kid is drowning. Well, the mother's compassion, can you imagine it? Unbelievable compassion. But she doesn't look around the beach wondering who's going to save her baby, does she? She's in that water, whether she can swim or not. That's what a bodhisattva is, but for every single sentient being. And we can't even imagine, this is what I mean by bodhicitta is so outrageous. We can't, it just seems like science fiction to talk like this. We can't even imagine what that's like. When we meet people who they say have accomplished it, like the Dalai Lama, let's say Lama Zopa, some of you would know other lamas. You see it, but you don't believe it's like that. You can't believe that this is possible, because we just project our own junk onto someone else. I mean, the Dalai Lama makes a big effort to be normal. He acts and sounds normal, you know. But anybody, I mean, I remember years ago when we did two different times, you know, when we've invited His Holiness to the different centres, and one time in Australia in 96, when I was editing Mandala, we did a big issue of Mandala. We gave away like 100,000 copies. And we did a special one about Tibet and everything. And then we reported on the Dalai Lama's big visit. It was a 2-month visit. And I interviewed like 50 to 60 people, the police, the media, people had any contact with the Dalai Lama over this 2-month period, the hotel workers. Everybody was just gobsmacked, was moved to tears by this special person. And yet when you see him, he's funny, he's normal, he acts extremely down to earth. He does not sound holy in any way or form, you know. But everybody cannot help but be deeply moved by this person. You just can't help it. It's just not possible not to be. Unless, of course, you're a Chinese communist, which means you can't stand him. Because that's what they say is the quality of a bodhisattva, you know, of a Buddha. They've got not a fraction of attachment and ego and jealousy and anger left. It's hard to talk like this. I mean, His Holiness spends all his time trying to act like the rest of us. He never goes on about anything because it's too hard for us to imagine being this way. Or when you hear about people like Lama Zopa who never sleeps, you can't imagine what that means. What are you talking about? Why wouldn't he sleep? The man's an idiot. Well, you know, they're already they're great tantric yogis. They completely have control over their subtler mental and physical energies. They don't need sleep. But also, for them, what drives that is their compassion. As Roger says about Lama Zopa, for Rinpoche, sleep is a disgusting waste of time. I mean, this is too much for our poor minds. We don't know how to factor that into normal life, you know. And what drives people like that, why he doesn't want to sleep, is because it's wasting time, it's being unconscious. And he has to use every second becoming a Buddha and benefiting sentient beings in the way that they do. I mean, in very marvelous ways. It's kind of inconceivable for us. It just seems wrong, you know, it seems abnormal. As Milarepa said, whatever the world does, dharma is opposite, you know. So great compassion is this powerful attitude that one has to cultivate day by day. What can I do to help? Not look around and hope someone else does it. And this becomes the fierce driver of the compassion of the bodhisattvas, you know. And then we're talking here bodhisattvas going from life to life to life to life, because it takes a long time to accumulate the appropriate amount of virtuous and wise energy that will culminate in being a Buddha. It takes a long time. So great compassion is this outrageous view, you know, this extraordinary attitude of I will make it happen. I myself alone, if I alone will do it. It's that courage of the bodhisattva. We've got to cultivate that. It's not natural to us, there's no question. So then it culminates in this tonglen, this amazing practice from that series of verses called the 8 verses of mind training, the 8 verses of exchanging self for others, basically. And the 7th one is where tonglen has its source, I would think. So tonglen is this amazing practice, an attitude, where you practice visualizing somebody's suffering, like a person in front of you, and you visualize taking upon yourself. You can use your breath as a method of doing it, using your breath. You visualize breathing in that person's suffering and imagining as you breathe it in, it smashes your self-cherishing, your self-centeredness. And in other words, the attitude isn't, oh, I'm trying to get a headache. Let's say they've got a headache. You're not trying to get a headache. And this is not a healing technique. This is not a method to heal other people. This is a method for you to develop this courageous attitude of the bodhisattva that I would rather have the suffering than them. It's a practice for you. And then when you breathe out this blissful white light and you visualize giving to this person whatever you've got, all your food, your money, your health, your merits, everything. So that's a profound, outrageous attitude. You can do it as much as you like. You can walk down the street and imagine doing it to somebody. You don't have to sit there formally doing it with your breath and your meditation. It's an attitude, and as the culmination of that is bodhicitta, when others now are first. This doesn't happen overnight, I promise. This takes a long, long time of constant practice. You're reprogramming your mind, So then you've got bodhicitta. We have to go so quickly, It's 10 to 9 already, 10 to 9, 10 to 8 for you. So that's many techniques, but it culminates in this outrageous bodhicitta. Then you continue your practice, and this is meaning from life to life to life. Bopping around as an ordinary person. You don't have to be a monk or a nun. You can be a Fred, you can be a Mary down the road, you can be the shopkeeper, you can be the beggar. You'll take any aspect, it doesn't matter. Your job is to go through life after life, literally growing yourself into a Buddha, perfecting these first 4 of the next stages of practice, the first 4 of the 6 perfections, they call them. So the first one is the practice of generosity. There's 3 levels of generosity. The giving of things, the giving of advice, and the giving of protection. So the one of giving things, I think, is a very powerful one for us. We like to give advice. It's meant to be more difficult. We love giving advice, even if we're not qualified. But we don't like giving $1, We're very concrete about our money, aren't we? We're very fixed about how much money we've got. We all reconcile every cent we have and check the bank every time. We would never just lose $25 and not worry about it. We get very anxious. So we really concretize money very deeply. And the fact is, it's the measure in our culture, isn't it, of having or not having. We don't save our cows or our kilos of rice anymore. Wealth is this stuff that's called money, with this capital. So to be generous is a very powerful practice, but you start like everything, you start small. So I always talk about my experience with the prison project because I was editing Mandala and a letter came from a prisoner because they had a book by Wisdom Publications and in the back was the address of Mandala magazine. So I was the editor. I got a letter on my desk and it sat there for a couple of months and I finally answered it. So it was this boy, Arturo, 18 years old, I think, 20 years, this is 96, sorry. And he told me he'd been in prison adult prison since he was 16 in Pelican Bay up in Northern California, one of the top security prisons. Then before that, he was in juvenile hall, since he's 11, he'd been in gangs in Los Angeles. And he said he'd read a Buddhist book. He was now in the top security prison, SHU, the security housing unit, which is very common. It used to be against human rights, and they really struggled with this prison when it was first developed 30 years ago. Now it's normal throughout the country, where they're in permanent lockdown. And of course, all the people in permanent lockdown in the California prisons is all the gangsters, I mean, there are the Mexican gangs and the black gangs and some white supremacist gangs. The Mexicans and the blacks are the biggest ones. And within the prisons, there were these unique gangs. I learned all about gang culture, you know. I mean, on the streets of Los Angeles, there's a gang every block. But in the prisons, this really shows how bizarre it is. This really shows how it's empty, actually. You know, my friends told me, because I met all these Mexicans in prison, and they told me, you know, you've got these two gangs in prison. It's changing a lot now. Lots of things have happened now, a lot of changes in the laws as well, which is good, because the laws were so horrendous. I mean, Arturo, this young man who wrote, he's 16 when he was tried as an adult. He hadn't killed anybody. He'd just been in gangs, you know. But the laws are so severe, he was given 3 life sentences, you know. He's now out. He's now 42 now. He got out when he was about 40. He's finally out. It was amazing. He did so well. I can't believe it. It's incredible. He's still out. It's incredible. Since he's 11, been in prison, basically. No, nothing else, you know. So in the prisons, you've got the southern Mexicans and the northern Mexicans. There's only 2 gangs. So you and I, let's say, you know, Mary Ellen and I are 2 gangsters in Los Angeles, and we're the worst enemies. She's one gang and I'm another. Then we go to prison next day. We will become blood sisters, because we are now we're the Sureños. What is it? Sureños, the Southerners, because we're both from Los Angeles. Suddenly we'll join the Southerners gang, and we will die for each other. Then we get out of prison, we'll kill each other, because we become this is so bizarre, isn't it? And then the other gang was the Northerners, and they're from San Francisco, a roundabout. And they were the worst enemies. They hated each other more than the blacks and more than the white supremacists. And when they had their wars, they told me, the Southerners teamed up with the white supremacists, whom they hated, against the Northerners, Northern Mexicans, and the blacks, whom they hated. I mean, talk about bizarre, you know. But it's just empty. It proves you just how you label things, you know. Anyway, I learned all about gang culture. So there he is, this young man, and all these prisoners. Why was I telling you about all this? Oh, yeah, I got this letter. Now, why was I telling you about that? Oh, yeah. Why was I telling you about
Giving,
okay,
generosity.
So I'm so sorry, I'm raving on here. Yes. I was editing Mandala. I was a nun. I was living at LMB. I was getting $400 a month, which is very generous, and my board and keep. So then so Arturo wrote his letter, and I saw he doesn't have any money, he has no family, he doesn't have a computer, I can't just say, go see that website. So I look in my pocket, I look in Mandela's pocket, there's nothing there, of course not. But how could I say no? It was very good for practice. How could I say no? His letter was on my desk. I had to say yes. So I found a bit of pocket money, someone would give me some money, and I bought a book. And before I knew it, in 1 year, 40 people were writing, word of mouth. And every letter was so sincere. Every letter, these people sincerely wanting something, you know. Mostly in Shu initially, and then it grew. And now it's going 25 years later. We probably had letters from 20,000, 25,000 people in prison in this country, not mentioning Australia or other places. We must have given hundreds of thousands of books away. So giving, it began with the decision, we must give. We got no choice. I can't look around behind me, who's going to give, you know, and there was nobody. I had to do it. So you have to consciously make that effort. And the other thing was, with money and with how we are with money and with our own attitudes in general, we tend to say, if some big thing comes along, we'll say, oh, can't do that, not possible. We're going to get to that in the 4th perfection. The 4th perfection is enthusiasm, joyful effort, this courageous attitude. I'll get to it in a minute, all right? But here with giving, I had to do it. And then I hired a person, paid her $5, and it grew from there, you know. So when I got a letter, instead of saying, oh, not possible, I can't do it, I'd have to say, I will do it. And then you find the money. And that's how that prison project, all the years I ran it, 15 years, that's how it worked. We had the courage, people I hired, we all worked together. We had the courage to say, we will do it. We make a plan, and then the money will come. And it worked all the time. It's continuing to go, you know. So giving is a very powerful one. But we've got to be very careful in our minds, because we don't think we're not generous. We don't think we're miserly, but we don't like to give. So there's different approaches. There's, for me, a brilliant practice. This sounds so corny, but it's really profound. You know, in the old-fashioned days when you had a letterbox, a mailbox, we've still got a mailbox, still even get letters, you know. So if you open up your 2 envelopes, and one envelope has a bill for $100, and one has a check for $100. Well, I've never met a human being on this planet who will look at the bill and go, oh, fantastic, I must pay my bill. And who looks at the check and goes, oh gosh, I better give that away. No way in the world. Nobody likes paying bills. Think about it, people. Nobody questions. But if every thought we have, which is karma, programs your mind, what do you think you're doing to yourself when you think, I don't want to give, I can't afford it, I haven't got enough money? You've got to cultivate the attitude that you want to give. At the time when I was doing the prison project, one nun was selling her house in Australia. And she asked Lama Zopa to write a mantra on a crystal to put in the house to help sell the house. And Rinpoche said, and this has become my, for my bodhichitta trust now, which helps lots of projects, it's my motto. He said to her, do not think of receiving, think of giving. So giving is the first of these four, but it is profound, because if we analyze our minds, we don't think we're mean, but we are really mean. We're really scared of giving money. We're really very scared. We'll give if we get a tax break. We'll give if we get something. You go to Starbucks or whatever coffee shop you go to, and you'll give $20 and you get a cake and a pastry and a coffee. And then if you analyze it, maybe 5, 7 of those dollars is pure profit. In other words, you've given a donation to Starbucks. But you don't complain, because we understand commerce. You don't get upset, but to give $7 to the homeless person outside from whom you get nothing, no way in the world. We don't even like giving to smelly homeless people. We give all these 27 reasons. They might use it for drugs, they might do this, or because we get nothing in return. I mean, we're all like this. It's natural. We've got to really look into our minds, And then when we understand karma, when we really understand karma, we would only want to be generous. Because if we, as Lama Zopa says, there are 2 main causes for the life that we have right now. One is morality, non-harming, in particular non-killing, which gives you the human body. But the other one, why we're not born in a desert, why we're not born homeless, why we're not born in countries where you cannot get a job, is because of generosity, of giving material things. And of course, of not stealing. So for us to not want to keep giving is just plain stupidity for oneself, Giving is the most powerful practice. And it's the first of these 4. As Tsongkhapa says in his Hymns of Experience, this wonderful Lamrim text, generosity is the wish-fulfilling jewel with which you can fulfill the hopes of all sentient beings, meaning it's the beginning of opening your heart to wanting to help others. It's the basis of the activity of the bodhisattvas, in that it gives the selfless and undaunted courage to want to lead all sentient beings to enlightenment. Because the 6 perfections are taught in order of difficulty. So generosity is the first. More difficult is morality. Even more difficult, patience. Even more difficult, enthusiasm. They go like that. So generosity is stupendous, And material things is the first kind. The one that we don't like to do. It really needs lots of thinking. Not to be foolish giving. Sometimes we're really foolish and just give everything away. That's idiotic. Be strategic. And that's why the bodhisattva path, on the Hinayana path, the first level of practice, junior school and high school, yes, you keep a humble life there. You don't need many possessions. You don't want money. You keep it simple. It's true. On the bodhisattva path, completely different attitude. Bodhisattvas can be kings and mega rich people because they've got no ego, no attachment, and they need resources. Bodhisattvas use the resources of this world to benefit sentient beings. Lama Zopa is renowned for his generosity. He's unbelievable. From himself, he has nothing. He's a humble monk who has and needs nothing. But money just comes pouring in and it goes pouring out the next hand. You be careful if you visit Lama Zopa. You give him your beautiful Tara statue that you spent $150 on. You'll think it's so precious. Well, you wait, because the next person in will come out with your Tara statue. I promise you. He just receives in one hand and he gives it with the other. He's famous for his generosity. You can't even imagine the number of projects he has. And that's why he thinks, what can I do to give? Projects don't start themselves. He creates them, and then the money comes, He's unbelievable. He somehow has money to give. This center here got something like $100,000 or $80,000 from him. I mean, you think, where does Lama Zopa get money? He hasn't got a fundraiser. It's his merit, There's this famous story about Sarah J. Monastery, his monastery in the south of India. And years ago, the abbot there asked Rinpoche to try and raise funds to start a food fund to build a kitchen, because all the monks there are really poor and have no money, and you feed yourself. If you haven't got money, you're poor. You don't eat. It's not like the West, where the monks and monasteries and places or convents and things like the Catholics especially, where they all take care of their people. Not like that. So, but it's changing. Kopan was always like that, because Lama Yeshe was really moved by the Christian way of doing things. So anyway, he was going to raise all this money they needed millions to start a fund, so they live on the profit, on the interest of the fund, right? So the story goes something like this, that Roger kind of couldn't see any evidence of Rinpoche doing any fundraising. He was wondering what was going to happen. So then one time he had a meeting, it was in Taiwan, and he had a meeting with the Taiwan abbess. And the abbess told Roger the following morning that she had the meeting with Rinpoche. She said that she had a dream the night before that Kuan Yin appeared to her and said, this very special person is coming tomorrow morning, and give him whatever he wants. Well, what did he want? $992 and $990,000.22, please. And she gave it, because the Chinese are amazing. All the monasteries are completely taken care of by all the lay people, and the monasteries, everything back to the lay people. It's amazing. So he's got this direct line to the Buddhas, you know. So generosity, and he's an amazing example of generosity. Unbelievable. And even the way he does water bowls in his house in Aptos, and in his houses wherever he's got. The nuns who live there, they work 8 hours every day doing water bowls. 8 hours a day. In Kopan, one nun, Ven Jan, in this room that Rinpoche's got with all these statues, people give him everything. He's got nothing. She all day takes care of the water bowls. Every surface you've got a holy image and water bowls, offerings to the Buddhas. He's really, one of his major practices is generosity and giving. So, and just in your mind as well, giving to the Buddhas. Imagine giving. One time there's this story, they were flying going down into Hong Kong at night, and all the millions of lights, and Rinpoche nudged Roger. Give, he said, offer. In other words, even if you see lights, you imagine offering to the Buddha. You see beautiful things, you see flowers. We just think, oh, I wish I could have them. You offer them. So don't think of giving, of receiving. Think of giving. It's not just a cute thing. You give a bit of money every year and you get a tax break. It's a stupendous view to develop. It completely changes everything. And it's a courageous view, because every person you see, every ant, every dog you see, you're thinking, what can I do for them? What do they need? Right now we only think of our friends, you know. So it's a huge attitude to cultivate. Very, very courageous. That's giving, the first one. There's levels of giving. Then there's giving spiritual advice, which is even more profound. And there's another third lot, another one called giving protection. The next one is called morality. And this is now, as I said before, the first level of practice of Buddhism is the practice of the ethics of refraining from harming. Here we now actively cultivate the practice of actually benefiting sentient beings. Well, whom do you benefit? Whoever needs help. Who needs help? Everybody. Rich people, poor people, crazy people, imprisoned people, dogs, ants, whoever you see, they need something, they need help. So this is like an extension of generosity. You're not just giving things and advice, but you're giving yourself in a way, you know. And you can see it with the times of COVID-19. Everybody's suffering, but you see all these amazing stories of people deciding, what can I do to help others? Some people are just sitting in their little house thinking, why is nobody helping me? But look at all the people who are also suffering, helping others. This is amazing. This is an amazing attitude, you know. We're all together in it, but they're the ones thinking, what can I do to help others? This is huge. And we can see that when we're really overwhelmed by our own misery, our own attachment and own jealousy, we can't possibly think of helping others. It's just too difficult. That's why you've got to do the wisdom wing first. So then after morality, you've then got these next two called patience and enthusiasm. These sound so peculiar. So patience, there's a whole level of practice. I didn't even go into it. There's masses of it. When we first get bodhichitta, the whole part of practice there of the exchanging self for others is understanding the 8 worldly dharmas, understanding this more subtle level of attachment, understanding how we're trying to transform problems. There's a whole level of it. I didn't go into it. There's no time, I'm sorry to say. Tonight, anyway. But here, patience, what it is, we have a big misconception about patience. You know, I think we conflate patience with passivity or with passive aggression. Really have a very gross view. Patience actually is a really courageous attitude. It's so courageous. When we understand in the high school, in the middle scope of the Lam Rim, when we understand... Sorry, I was sniffing. When we understand attachment and aversion, these two simple words, we really see them deeply inside ourselves and how they run the show. When we understand what aversion is what arises the millisecond our attachment doesn't get what it wants. So aversion is like this panic attack that pushes away that ugly thing, doesn't want that ugly thing. Attachment's this junkie that only wants the nice things. So what patience is welcoming the ugly thing. This really needs, obviously, profound, much practice, because it's utterly instinctive to have aversion to the thing that attachment doesn't want. Have aversion to, it's so obvious. It's so deeply ingrained in us. So this is a massive practice. So this practice here, there's 3 levels of patience. The first is, this is so shocking to us, it's patience in the face of abuse. This is too much for our mind, So we've got to ask the question all the time here, why do I need to practice patience? We see it as kind of being a goody-goody, or we see it as being passive-aggressive. Oh, she's so patient. But it's profound practice. Why? Because what's the quickest way? We're trying to get rid of delusions, right? And we're trying here to get rid of delusions because we want to get compassion, because we want to help other sentient beings. There's a sense of urgency. People's suffering is unbearable. So we want to smash the enemy. Well, the enemy is my delusions. So what's the quickest way to attack the enemy? Is the enemy is attachment and self-cherishing to get what I want. What's the quickest way to attack that? Give it what it doesn't want, which is someone being mean to me, someone lying to me, someone not believing my words at work, my sister being unkind to me. I mean, don't have to wait till you're abused or raped to do this practice. Keep it small. We have 1,000 opportunities a day to be patient, meaning to welcome. Not patience meaning kind of gritting your teeth and waiting for this ugly thing to go away. That's passive aggression. It's literally completely interpreting it differently and being glad. This is very bizarre for us. It's powerful practice. And of course, according to our capability. What else, The second kind of patience is patience in the face of problems like sickness and everything, It's learning to have a completely different view, a different attitude towards the bad things. Because the point is, this is where I find always so profound the example of my friend in prison, Sunny, who's out of prison now, lives in Ireland. She was wrongly accused of murdering 2 policemen back in the 70s. And she's this little hippie person. She lost her kids. Husband got executed. They were both in prison, accused. 17 years, she finally got out. She was found to be innocent, So, of course, the whole time she knew she was innocent. So the way she talked about her experience, you could really tell she didn't have much anger, which meant she had incredible patience, meaning she was able to use this utter nightmare, which was in solitary for years. Normal people would go completely mad, and that's because you have anger. But she was able to use this experience to strengthen herself, to become stronger, to realize, as she said, that I knew I had a choice. And what she meant was she knew she had a choice to reinterpret this nightmare, not just to say, this is wrong, how dare, and go mad. So that's what patience means. You literally interpret it differently. So as a result of her 17 years, she came out as a more wise, more amazing, more compassionate person. But the interesting point with patience, we think it means you chuck the baby out with the bathwater and you give up. Nothing to do with that. This is the irony. If you're full of anger and rage, we think you're doing something, but you don't even know what you're doing because you're losing the plot half the time. You can't even act. You don't even know what to do because you're so crazy. But a patient person, and that's her example, because she was patient and accepted this reality, it doesn't mean she didn't stop trying to get out. She never stopped for 17 years trying to get her freedom. But because she wasn't going out of her brain, she was capable of doing it. Because when you not go crazy with anger, your mind is sane and sensible. I remember hearing about some fellow, at the same time I read about her, who was also innocent, who was on death row, who went completely crazy with rage and despair. He would scream daily, I did not rape and kill that woman. So he could do nothing to get his freedom. He just went mad. She didn't go mad. She had patience. So patience, we don't factor that in modern psychology. It just sounds like a boring quality. But patience is a most stupendous practice. It is anger that makes us all go crazy. Anger makes us go crazy, So patience isn't passivity. It can often be interpreted like that. It's a courageous attitude that sees the problem and welcomes it, and then you find a way to work with it, Then you stay sane, and then you achieve your goal. It's very powerful. The next one's called perseverance, and this is hilarious. It's called enthusiastic perseverance or joyful effort. And it sounds very peculiar, but let's look at the opposite, because this tells us exactly what perseverance is. The opposite is very funny. It's called laziness. Now you listen, you're all going to recognize, I promise. There's different levels of this laziness. The first one, and sometimes it's like there's two, and they can put them together, but we'll make them separate. We can see they're very linked. The most obvious laziness we've all got, and we all know this, is it's called can't be bothered. Now analyze that. What is the thing you would say you can't be bothered doing? Well, guess what? It's what attachment doesn't want. In other words, we are addicted to our comfort zone, whatever our comfort zone might be. And the moment you've got to stretch yourself out of your comfort zone, the first response is, oh no, can't be bothered, much too much effort. So we're just bone lazy. And the problem is attachment to the comfort zone. We don't like stretching ourselves. I mean, I use the analogy of going to the gym. It's just an analogy because we're not talking about samsara here. But we know if you go to the gym and you start doing your rowing, I like the rowing machine, and then the moment it gets difficult, the moment you start to sweat, the moment you feel the muscle, you stop your rowing. You say, oh, I did my rowing. Well, you didn't do your rowing, because we know the only time that your muscles will change is when you push beyond your limit and you start to pressure and you sweat and you breathe hard and your muscles hurt. You will not achieve a single thing until you do that. So we understand this. So here we're talking about our practice. We're talking about the effort we have to make to do the things we're trying to accomplish, working for the Dharma Center, doing your own practice, doing your projects that have something beneficial. We're not talking about samsara here. That's another form of laziness. Here we understand it, and it's just effort is not comfortable. We don't like feeling uncomfortable, mentally or physically. So we'll give every reason not to do it. And we know because of that, we will never achieve our goal. We all know we admire people who persevere, who go through the obstacles, who never give up, who have enthusiasm. We admire people like this. Because we have this primordial, this is the grossest level of laziness. And what it leads to is the next one. And this is so tricky because we think it's a virtue. So you see the thing you have to do. Oh, can't be bothered. Then you say to yourself, you lie and you say, oh, I'll do it later. And you feel all noble because you think you really will. Well, we all know later will never come. And we spend our lives procrastinating, putting things off. We all know that. And we're just talking our samsaric jobs. So this is what prevents us from achieving anything at all. We're talking here Dharma practice. So to have enthusiasm is the difference between a person who succeeds and a person who doesn't. It's this. And the bottom line is it's laziness is the problem. And laziness is based on attachment. It's very profound. So you've got to go one step at a time. You don't go berserk. You go one step at a time. And this is the thing too. This leads us to the third one, which doesn't even sound like laziness, but they call it the worst laziness of all. And that is the one that goes, oh, I can't achieve that. That's not possible. I'm not capable. That's our worst one. And it's actually the deepest form of laziness because we buy into it as a truth, And so that means we have no sense of interdependence, no sense of dependent arising. Because we know all the cliches our mother would tell us. Rome wasn't built in a day. You pave the way to something. I love that saying. You pave the way. It happens one step at a time. Everything starts with the first step. We know all these sayings. But our trouble is we see the end result. We see where we're at now, and we can't imagine getting there. No, it's too difficult. I can't achieve that. But this is completely mistaken. The reality is we're discussing here getting concentration, practicing Dharma, helping others, doing our job, running the Buddhist Center. Enthusiasm. We get overwhelmed. I see around all the centers. I go around all the centers. We get the job, 2 years, you're the director, you get burned out, it's not possible, I can't do it, I don't know how to do it, you give up. I mean, it never ends. But if you have enthusiasm, but not just enthusiasm on its own, you've got to have skill. You can't just have enthusiasm to make a cake, but not have a recipe. You'll just go crazy. That's called idiocy. You've got to have a recipe. You've got to have a system. Then you persevere. That's how you succeed. Perseverance is the crucial one for any success at all. Without that, you can have patience coming out of your ears. You can have morality. You can have generosity. But if you do not have enthusiasm, you will not succeed. This is the vital one, without which you won't succeed. And the key thing, all the lamas say, and it's logical, if you don't know the benefit of what you're trying to accomplish, then you will never have enthusiasm. So, of course, it's easy to see the benefit of buying a chocolate cake. It's easy to see the benefit of getting some money. You really can see it as tangible. We're prepared to make the effort. But we can't, it's too hard for us to see the benefit of having concentration, practicing morality, working on our minds, working for the Dharma Center, struggling away doing this boring job. We can't see the benefit. Because when we understand karma, we understand how it works, we understand the major object of generosity, the major object of our morality will be a Dharma Center. Because as Lama Zopa says, it benefits countless sentient beings' minds. It's the most potent object. So to persevere is the only way you'll be successful, but with skills. You've got to have the skill. Because we give up, we say, I can't cope, I can't do it, it's too much effort, I can't handle it. That's how we go, we panic, We rush back to our comfort zone. So it's very powerful. Enthusiasm, joyful effort. So that's, we've still got lots of time. Okay, good. I think time for some questions now. Then we've got concentration and wisdom. We'll go to the last two. Any questions, folks? We might go a bit after past, if that's okay, to fit in concentration and emptiness.
You just unmute yourself and ask directly, or you can put it in the chat box and Steve will read it.
Venerable, I have a question.
Good. Yes, on. Hang on. It's going to blow my nose. Yes, Tom. Good. Yes.
Thank you. Could you speak more, please, about the self that experiences karma and vexations and generates bodhichitta? That self within selflessness that does all these things.
I understand. I'm going to talk about that. This is the sixth perfection. The fifth perfection is getting single-pointed concentration, shamatha, and the sixth one is getting wisdom. That's exactly what we'll talk about in a minute. It's coming. Okay?
Thanks,
Tom. Thanks, darling. Anyone else? Nobody. Okay. So let's go to... Yeah?
I think question.
What?
The question in the chat box is, what was the difference between empathy and compassion?
I know I've heard in the Western definitions of these terms there are quite specific differences. But I mean, unless Venerable Palmer can tell me something different from her studies, but I think we just use these terms synonymously. And so there's the whole different way of talking in the West. But compassion or empathy, is the way I understand it, is you see a person suffering, whatever level of suffering it is, even the simple level of suffering when bad things happen. And your heart goes out. And of course, the point here, though, when we understand this compassion the way Buddhism's talking, it's not isolated from understanding the reason for the suffering. Your view of karma so feeds into your understanding of the suffering that and your compassion increases for this person because you realize it's due to their past actions that they're having this terrible suffering. So that's really why bodhisattvas have such compassion for us, because they see us suffering and we're frantic and we're going crazy and we're probably blaming somebody else for all our suffering, going crazy. So this is so moving for the bodhisattva because they know clearly that person has caused their own suffering, but we don't realize it. So the main reason for bodhisattvas having compassion is because we're ignorant of cause and effect. So your compassion is stupendous and is much broader than merely seeing a person with a headache. You have enormous compassion for them. You see their suffering. Your heart is touched by it. Then, of course, on top of that, you have this great compassion, wishing, what could I do to help? How can I help? That's compassion in Buddhism. So I think empathy fits into that. But I know in the West we have some different definition. Next one. Question? Mary Ellen?
Venerable Robina.
Yeah. Who's Christina?
Yeah. You spoke when you're talking about patience, you mentioned patience in the face of abuse. And I was just wondering, in terms of framing that, is that just say it's a family member or someone that you care about, is it how much you can bear and knowing that you can't change that person, that you tolerate listening to them? Or, I mean, if you can't change them.
So what do you mean by listening to them? You have to give me a simple scenario.
Well, say someone's abusing you for whatever reason, like,
they're abusing you. They're shouting at you.
Yeah, they're shouting at you.
Yeah.
And it's kind of their nature to find fault in who you are, but then you're kind of, is it up to you to just cultivate and develop your own sense of self, in order to, and you know that you're going to interact with this person ongoing, like there's no way of.
If it's a person you're close to, a person like family, and you're living with them or seeing them all the time, then this is where, even in the wisdom wing level, we've got to look at what we're capable of, Christina. If we see it's like it could be a boyfriend, it could be your mum. Let's just say it's a person you've got an ongoing relationship with. It could even be your boss. So the point is this: even in the earlier stages of practice, in the wisdom wing, you've got to check up on something. You've got the simple question you have to ask yourself is, can I handle this? Am I capable? What level am I at? Am I capable of dealing with this? Because you can see that's the way the boss is. That's the way your mum is. That's the way your boyfriend is. So you've got to check, first of all, am I capable of doing this? That means putting up with it. Because you've got to know you can't change that person. So often with attachment, we keep trying to change them. So if you really know your own capability right at that level, then you got to decide, I will either stay or go. These are the two things and we don't even get to these options half the time. We just mull around and go back and forth and should I, shouldn't I, and swear about them and curse at them and get angry and upset and forgive them. We just never make a decision. So we've got to be very clear, am I capable of doing this? Is there value in this relationship? Now, let's say it's your mum. With your mum, you've got to learn to put up with. If she's a complete maniac and stabs you daily and puts heroin in your breakfast, maybe you've got to leave your poor old mum, But if it's just a person who's annoyed and angry and upset, and you've got to decide, can I handle this? Now, if you say you can handle it, that's a really important decision to make. Now you learn to work on your mind. You learn to work on your mind. What choice do you have? So here you grow that wisdom much more powerfully, where you really practice eating their abuse for breakfast. But this shows how advanced it is, Christina, because for most of us it's really suffering. Because why? Because we've got attachment, and attachment only wants people to be nice to us. So it's really difficult practice. But at the very first level, you also learn to control your body and speech. You don't talk about them. You don't go on about it. But that's already a profound level of practice. Here it's even more profound. So you've got to know what you're capable of, Christina. You've got to know how much weight you can bear. But most of us don't do that. We just become victims and get raged and angry and kill ourselves or kill our mum. You've got to make some decisions. So if you can handle that boss and you can check that job and see for the moment there's quite a bit I can learn in this job, I can get something from this, and then you forget about the boss. If you can do that, that's very intelligent, and you make the most of that job. That is what my friend Sunny did in 17 years of living in hell, because she didn't have an option. Do you see my point? So she learned to grow from it. But if you can't grow from it and it's overwhelming you and you have the luxury of leaving the job, kindly leave the job, Christina. But this is the problem. Most of us will do neither. You come home and curse and swear your boss, and I say, well, you could leave the job. Oh, no, Robina, I couldn't leave my job. I'll never get another job. Oh, no, I couldn't do that. Then, okay, Christina, you're deciding to stay in your job. Then you can change your mind. No, I can't do that. He's a creep. Then most people live like this and live in hell. Neither changing our mind or changing the situation. We might as well be in prison. But at least my friends in prison know they can change their mind. So here is a more advanced level even of that.
Is that also a degree, your degree of renunciation?
I'm talking about this is renunciation, dear.
Okay.
I'm not even talking the patience one, which is more advanced. I'm talking at high school level. Junior school level, you control your mouth.
Yeah.
That's already advanced. High school, you'd start to look in your mind and you'd try to give up attachment and give up anger. That's the practice I'm talking about. Already that's advanced, darling. This one, where you happily have the abuse and eat it up for breakfast, because it's making you stronger. It's like when you have to spar at karate and you have the top person sparring with you. It's a real challenge, but you use it for your advantage. Same here.
Okay.
Do you understand,
Thank you.
darling?
I do, yeah, I understand. Thank you.
This is difficult. It's plain called difficult, What else, people?
There's one more question in the chat box.
Yeah.
It is, what are the benefits of engaging in serving at Dharma centers?
Well, the way the lamas talk, and this is something we've got to think about because it doesn't make much sense to us. The way they talk in general, and right back in karma, the main factor that determines the character of the action we do, that is to say, the main factor that determines whether the thing we do or say or think is negative or positive, because that's down to brass tacks, is not even the action, is the motivation. So you could be, your husband can be sitting in there doing his meditation, and he thinks he's so holy, and you're making the noise doing the dishes. Will you be quiet? I'm trying to meditate. Because we think he's doing the holy practice and you're just doing the dishes. No, your motivation could be much purer than his. So his action is not even dharma. Your action is dharma because your motivation was bodhichitta or kindness to others. You understand? So the motivation is crucial. Now, there are some actions, the lamas say, that the object of the action is so potent that even without a good motivation, you create lots of virtuous karma. So we've got to think about this, okay? So that would be, the Buddha, holy objects that represent enlightened energy, the Sangha for what they represent. So basically, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and monasteries and Dharma centers and the Guru and the Buddha, they represent something so powerful that any action we do in relation to them, because of the karmic connection and because of the deep, and it's putting imprints into our mind, and because let's say a Dharma center is helping so many people, and helping many people, and those people help other people, and those people, they help other people. It goes out, it fans out in a very profound way, because helping people's minds is the most powerful way to help. So, if you're generous and you've got a big business and you want to make a lot of money, it might even be a nice thing to help the environment. That's fine. But the Buddhist view would be if you use that money to help a Dharma center, to help projects that help people's minds, it's far more powerful virtue, far more meritorious. I know Lama Zopa has said, even just working for just one day in a Dharma center, and that could be sweeping the floor, cleaning the toilet, the amount of virtuous karmic seeds you drop into your bank vault, and that's my analogy, in just one day, and the amount of purification of your delusions that you accomplish in that one day working for a Dharma center, which is a place that helps people's minds, is equivalent to what you would accomplish by doing years of retreat. Now, he's not just making that up, but it doesn't seem evident to us, and doesn't seem logical to us. But if we think about it, then it's kind of powerful, So that's why, if we're trying to be skillful with our resources, with our money, with our time, because most of us won't go up to the mountains and meditate 24 hours a day like Geshe Lama Konchog did, then we have to be wise and strategic in the way we use our time and the way we use our dollars. So the Buddhist view always is, to support things that support others. So because Lama Zopa is my Lama, and he's got lots of projects, he's got a project to help animals. Well, if I'm going to help animals, I'm happy to help the animal shelter down the road, but for me, I'd rather use my limited resources of my bodhichitta trust to give it to Lama Zopa's project, which also helps animals, because it's Lama Zopa and he's a powerful object for me. So you be strategic in understanding what is the most beneficial karma for you as a practice. It's not being self-centered, it's being intelligent. I hope that answers the person's question. Let's get on to the last two perfections, okay? So the next one, this first four, you bop around from life to life to life to life, relating to sentient beings. These four are practiced directly in relation to sentient beings. And because the bodhisattvas have another agenda, in order to help people, you need to have a connection with them. They need to know you and see you and like you. So look at the Dalai Lama. Millions of people adore him. Okay, millions can't stand him as well. So that would be the result. Not just because we're clever, we recognize a nice person, but he must have hooked us eyeball to eyeball in life after life after life after life after life in his job of becoming a Buddha. He's connected with all these millions of people who now, when we see him, he's got us in the palm of his hand. So he's hooked us. So now we listen to every word he says. Then bodhisattvas and Buddhas need that. If no one likes you, how can they listen to you? If you're a boss, even in a company, and no one likes you, you might be the best boss in the universe, but if no one likes you, nothing will happen. So bodhisattvas need to have a connection with people, and they do that by going life after life after life, you know. So the next two are you perfect these two in your meditation. So the first one is shamatha, Sanskrit for calm abiding. Now, in its character, it's actually a Hinayana teaching. It's a Theravadan teaching. It's not even a Mahayana teaching, but it's taught in the framework of the Mahayana path, in the bodhisattva stage, combining it with emptiness. Emptiness also is a Hinayana teaching, but they're taught here in the framework of the bodhisattva path, where they're combined with bodhicitta. So concentration is this crucial state of cognition that we need to accomplish in order to rid the mind of all the delusions, in order to do the analysis and the deconstructing of all the delusions in the mind, these conceptual constructions that we have been creating for eons and that we believe are reality. We've got to deconstruct, ever more subtle level, ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle. So we've got to get this concentration to a laser-like state of focus that we don't even posit as possible or even as existing in modern psychology. Because that level of focus doesn't need a brain. This doesn't exist for us, does it? In our modern world. This concentration, as Lama Yeshe talks about in his book on Mahamudra, as he says, which is a book about how to realize emptiness, it is simply not possible to finally uproot the root delusion, which is what's meant by quote unquote realizing emptiness, which we'll now talk about. You need to get this subtle, laser-like level of your mind, like the microscope of your mind. It's only at that level that we can really do the work of unpacking and unraveling and deconstructing and ridding the mind, finally, of all the layers of misconceptions. It's quite a sophisticated thing. It's not some hippie-trippy thing, you know. It's super technical. So just briefly, concentration. Okay, in the model of the mind in Buddhism, they talk about, we've discussed this before, you've got three categories of states of mind. You've got the positive, virtuous, appropriate, valid, reasonable, correct conceptions. And there's some really meaning in that. The virtues are valid cognitions because they're in sync with dependent arising, because that's the real reality. The delusions are not valid conceptions because they're made up concepts. They don't have any basis in reality. There's a disconnect between attachment and the cake on the plate. My attachment sees my mind, my eye consciousness sees the shape and color. My conceptuality knows it's called a chocolate cake. That's all clear, but my attachment runs in and goes berserk and over-exaggerates the deliciousness, the very status of the chocolate cake, the deliciousness of the chocolate cake. So it's a misconception. With my attachment glasses on, what I see on that plate isn't the cake that's there. This is the way all the delusions work, and we especially get to that when we'll get to emptiness. This is the key way the mind works. This is why we have to study Buddhist psychology if we want to be Buddhists, because Buddha's got a very unique approach. So all the delusions are misconceptions, and all the valid states of mind are valid conceptions because they're in sync with reality. Not totally until we realize emptiness. Then you've got a third category of states of mind, and I like to call these the mechanics. And these are all the parts of our mind that make us function. Everybody needs these. Whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need concentration, you need intention, you need attention, you need discrimination. There's many of these. And the meditators, you develop these to an incredible degree of brilliance when you do single-pointed concentration. These are vital. So when we're doing concentration meditation, what this is basically it's described in terms of 9 stages of cultivation. And so it's basically what you're aiming for is to have single pointed concentration. So concentration is a very specific state of mind that can stay on one thing. And in that process, there's all these other states of mind that we're trying to cultivate that culminate in concentration. So one of the first ones we have to use is called mindfulness. So there's many varieties in the modern world, interpretations of that. But the Buddhist view of this is very precise. The psychological definitions have got nothing to do with how Buddha talks. It's a specific single state of mind that is equivalent to good memory. So, but we call it all these other things, but basically mindfulness is the ability to not forget what you're doing moment by moment. That's it. And we all, as Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness. But we in psychology, it's got other definitions and other things added into it, but that's not here. It's very specific. So in the beginning, the two main obstacles, and these are the obstacles that we're gradually conquering all the way through to the 9th stage. And those two main obstacles are the tendencies that we know very well. The tendency for the mind to be completely berserk, out of control, ADHD, all those terms. What's that called? What's ADHD? What's that mean? Attention deficit. Yeah, that's the one. That's the normal mind. Normal mind is ADHD. What's OCD? What's that called?
Obsessive compulsive.
Okay, that's another function of attachment. So ADHD and all their variations and OCD are variations of a normal mind which is out of control, which is berserk, as they say in the text politely, excited. That's called attachment energy. We can't control our thoughts, Everybody's got that, but we have all these different labels for it in the West. Buddha labeled it, the Indians before him labeled it 3,000 years ago. And they were trying to steady that one. Now, the other extreme we have is when your mind becomes completely spaced out. So the two extremes of those, if you think about it in your daily life, when you're on a roll in your daily life, you wake up, you're wide awake and wound up and all perky, you've got 47 jobs to do and you rush around. That means you're utilizing that berserk excitement energy. You can get it focused, can't you? You can do some things. But if you suddenly, and the other extreme is when you go to sleep, when you're completely unconscious. We go between these two absolute extremes. And you can even see emotionally we go between these extremes. Look at bipolar. I'm not trying to be sarcastic here. When everything is just perfect and divine, you think you're in heaven, you think you're Mozart, that's when this level of mind has gone mad. No thermostat. And then the bubble bursts because it's not realistic and you go crashing down to despair. We have about 1,000 mini bipolar episodes in a day. It's attachment and aversion, attachment and depression. I'm not joking. So concentration meditation is this brilliant psychological skill, that can help us completely harness, completely learn to be in control. So Lama Yeshe in his Mahamudra book, he's amazing in how he tries to encourage us to meditate, So he gives some of the examples of the qualities you would accomplish with single pointed concentration. As he said, it seems impossible to believe. First of all, when you've accomplished it, even throughout your day, you have total effortless control over every tiny thought. You've got incredible, brilliant clarity, the likes of which you cannot even imagine. You've got memory like you can't believe it. You've got clairvoyance. You've accessed this such a level of mind. You can see the past, the future, the minds of others. You have effortless control. You are radiant. You are joyful. You are clear in levels that we can't imagine. This is what every one of us is capable of. Okay, it'll take you several years. You can't do it in your spare time. You've got to give up sex, drugs and rock and roll and mortgages and everything and find a really conducive environment and work for several years. And people like you and me, like Venerable Renee and wonderful people are actually accomplishing this, If you read Lama Yeshe, normally in the text they just tell you the technical descriptions of the stages. Lama would get us excited and tell us how you'd be. And of course, one quality you would have, which sounds hilarious to us, you would be ecstatically happy. Now, we say ecstatic, we think of a person screaming hysterically. No, your mind would be utterly peaceful, but utterly and continuously and naturally joyful. Your body will feel like a feather And when these are, the best you can do is try and imagine these words and then multiply them 1,000 times, because there's no equivalent in any shape or form in neuroscience or modern psychology. So the whole process is going between this, the ability, the tendency of the mind to go out of control and forget what you're doing, or the tendency of the mind to space out. So what happens when we sit down, we know very well, either you just cannot concentrate, you think you're going berserk, or you go to sleep, you know. So they're called excitement and dullness. So the whole, as you go through this process of accomplishing these 9 stages, they describe it in terms of getting more and more, less and less excited, less and less dull, until eventually you've got this laser-like, almost like an invisible place between these two, and you get to ever more subtle levels. The excitement gets more subtle. The dullness gets more subtle, and until eventually you've got this single pointedness, you know. I mean, Pabonka talks about you've got to achieve it in 6 months. I mean, you've got to be pretty highly realized. And the fact is, and I interviewed Venerable Rene in his retreat, when he did a retreat for 2.5 years at Ling in 1995. I interviewed him then, one of his first retreats, I think, or maybe not the totally first, but he was trying to get concentration. And, you know, he said that even he just touched upon the 5th of the 9 stages. And he said something like this: there's no question that the joy he experienced was so superior to any joy he'd ever experienced through his senses, because we're talking about mental joy. This is not even how we talk in our world, you know. But he also said, was very interesting, he knew in the 2.5 years he couldn't get past the 5th of the 9 stages, because he was a fairly newish meditator at the time, although it sounds pretty advanced. But he said that I interviewed him in Kopan Monastery. This is a really important point. I interviewed him in Kopan Monastery about this retreat. And if everybody's been to Kopan, you know it's a busy place. The dogs barking, all the Hindus having their prayers screaming out of the speakers at 5 in the morning. Nothing wrong, offering to Shiva and everybody. But it's a noisy place. But he said his retreat was at Ling, up in the Sierra Nevada in Spain. A beautiful place, blessed by His Holiness in 1982. And he said it was a gorgeous place for meditation. And Venerable Rene said, his mind at Kopan got more subtle, more easily than at Ling, because it's blessed by the presence of holy beings. They all say the main criterion for the best place to meditate is where holy yogis and Buddhas and beings have been there to meditate. That made his mind easier, more subtle. I found that very interesting. But he told me that there's no way in the world he could have gone and begun that retreat and stayed there for 2.5 years without having become a monk, living in lots of vows, doing masses of purification, doing lots of teachings, and even giving teachings. They were his prerequisites. They were his preparation. And talk about perseverance. Check your meditation. Check how much effort you have to make to even sit there for 5 minutes and try and watch your breath. And there he is for 2.5 years. And then you read about people like Geshe Lama Kontrog living naked in 6 feet of snow for 7, 8, 10 years. You can't even conceive of the effort, you know, and the amount of purification you'd have to do to get to that point, so you can get your mind to a subtle level, so you can start to get realization, so you can start to become a Buddha. So it's very amazing. Lama Yeshe's book is wonderful about this. It gives you lots of inspiration. Mahamudra, I really recommend you have it, study it, read it, whatever. Now let's talk about emptiness. Because everything in the entire path, from getting the guru, beginningless mind, getting the guru, impermanence, lower realms, refuge, karma, understanding delusions, getting equanimity, kindness of the mother, tonglen, generosity, all blah, blah, blah. Everything is now geared and leads us to the final work of cutting the root of all delusions, the realization of the ultimate way that every phenomenon exists in the universe. So, many ways to talk about it. But basically, emptiness and dependent arising. The king of logics to prove emptiness, as Lama Yeshe paraphrases it, Tsongkhapa, is dependent arising. Dependent arising is the shorthand for how things exist conventionally. Emptiness is the shorthand for how things exist ultimately. So this emptiness and dependent arising, they have been implied throughout the teachings. They're not explicit. They've been implied. Karma, for example, right at junior school, the explicit teaching about karma is ethics, control yourself. But the implicit teaching is dependent arising. Karma, the law of cause and effect, is one of the is a perfect example of the first level of dependent arising. So Buddha, there's millions of ways things exist interdependently. The logic to prove emptiness, but we can talk about presenting three main ways, which are ways roughly equivalent to Buddha's arguments with the previous views at the time where he diverged from the Hindus. I mean, there's Hindus an insulting term. There's so many views that existed at that time, such amazing sophisticated thinkers at that time. So the three main arguments he had. The first one was that, so karma's example, the implicit that karma is an example of dependent arising. So the more you think about karma, the more you take responsibility that the actions come from what I did in the past, blah, blah, blah. This loosens the grip of ego grasping. Karma makes you confident. Karma makes you self-confident. It stops you being a victim. It stops you being, sorry for yourself. It's very powerful. And that loosens the grip of ego grasping. So then you get to the second level of practice. And you start to look at the delusions. So the explicit teaching there is to see how they're so disturbing and painful. But the implicit teaching is to see how they're all liars, they're misconceptions. So these are preparing us to now get here to the real wisdom teachings, to get to the root of the problem. So one of the best ways to think about how things exist ultimately is to see it in the framework of how they exist conventionally. This is the way they talk. So basically, Buddha's saying everything in the universe, we have to name it and label it. He says everything in the universe, we have these different lenses on that cause us to misconceive everything. So attachment misconceives deliciousness, aversion misconceives ugliness. The root delusion, which informs both of those, actually misconceives the very ontological status itself of the delicious cake and the ugly boyfriend. That's the one we're trying to tackle now, So this is the subtlest one, of course. It's the most primordial misconception. It's called ignorance, ma rigpa in Tibetan. But it's like double trouble ignorance. And this is a really important point to understand. Regular ignorance, if you say to me, "What's that, Robina?" and I say, "I don't know," that's a really straightforward kind of ignorance, and it's very easy to fix. So you'll tell me, "Well, Robina, it's called a thermos," and I'll ask you what it is. You'll define it. It's a flat-bottom clay container that keeps your tea warm. I'll say, "Thank you very much. Now I know what a thermos is. I've got some wisdom." Now, if that was the ignorance we had about ultimate reality, we could get enlightened in a couple of years. I wouldn't be surprised. But the problem is, as His Holiness says, not only do we not know I'm using the simple example, not only do I not know it's a thermos, but I think it's a toilet. I mean, just use a simple example. Not only do I not know its reality, but I've made up a story about what I think it is, and I believe that story. So you're in trouble. You're not in touch with reality in a double way. This is why doing this work is so painful, because Buddha says for eons we've been believing we've not only don't know that there is no intrinsic thing. There's a simple word for it, that nothing has an inherent character. We're going to go into this. Not only do we not know that, but what we have done is make up a story that believes in the exact opposite. That there is, in fact, everything in fact has a real, intrinsic, pointable, findable, inherent, independent character. Now, we never thought that we thought that, did we? No one ever taught us that, but because the mistake is so primordial that we don't even know we think that. This is why realizing emptiness is so difficult. If we just, it would be quite easy if we didn't have this mistake. So we've got to even first identify the mistake first, then to start deconstructing that mistake, because it's primordially instinctive. And the Buddha would say that this mistake in our mind, in the mind of every sentient being, is the cause of eons of suffering, eons of universes, of hell realms, spirit realms, animal realms, human realms, God realms, formless realms, form realms. These delusions have created literally the entire universe. I mean, if this doesn't sound cosmic, I don't know what does, you know, but this is exactly what Buddha's saying. Everything comes from the mind over eons. We have constructed everything. Now we can also construct the good. It's all made by our mind, baby. So, if we're misconceiving everything, we first have to establish what a thing is conventionally before we discuss it. So we've all got to be on the same page and know that this is a thermos. And what is a thermos? It's, you give it a definition. Well, you could argue the definition has got two parts. One part tells you its conventional characteristics, flat-bottomed metal container. But you're not happy yet. You've got to know what its job is. That's the second part of the definition, and that is its function. Now, this is crucial to understand if we're going to understand emptiness. Absolutely vital. We've got to know the function of something. So the function of this, the job it has, is to keep my tea warm. Now, that's a definition, but that's not enough. Don't just believe your mother. She's got to prove it to you now. So she'll get her tea and she will pour, and we'll leave it for 2 hours, and we'll come back and we will discover it just fit the definition. Her tea was still warm, but that's still not enough. She's now got to check that there's no other cognition of this thing within the world that we live in that directly contradicts that. And there's even more you've got to do to tick the boxes. Once we're clear, we can all sign, tick the boxes, shake hands, all agree, now that is a thermos conventionally. And now we have to start looking into how it exists. Because Buddha says we got it all wrong. As Lama Zopa says, all the delusions in the mind, not just the main one, all the delusions in the mind decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that just aren't there. That's how all delusions function. So we've made up layers of lies. So this is where it gets very tricky. As Lama Zopa says, Buddha says there are two truths. One is the conventional character of something, the conventional existence, a thermos that holds my tea hot. That's a conventional statement. And how it exists conventionally in different levels, 3 different levels we can talk about. So the first one is thermos comes into existence in dependence upon countless causes and conditions. And among all those causes and conditions, you will not find thermos, because thermos is nothing other than the culmination of those causes. Now, then, and that's dependent arising. It depends upon causes, the first level. Now, the second level, the second argument Buddha gives is that thermoses exist in dependence upon their bits and pieces. That among all those bits and pieces, those parts, you will not find a thermos, because it's nothing other than, the basis. And this is the third one. The third level of dependent arising is that thermos is, the parts are merely, that thermos is the label that we put upon those parts. These are the 3 levels of dependent arising that we get. So let's just look at one of them, sort of in the middle. It's a bit of a conflation. You're conflating a bit the first 2 a little bit. And let's use the example of the object called I, which is the one we think about most, of course. Because the word I, self, me, myself, person, are all synonymous. A dog is a me, a person. A Buddha is a me or a person. A hell being is a me or a person. We are me's or persons, or they're all synonymous. Self, I, person are synonymous, okay? So, we fit the definition. I don't forget the definition of a person. Something like a person who creates causes or does. I forget what the definition is. But we can agree that term refers to us, okay? So let's analyze a little bit. We've got very little time left. Analyze how this phenomenon exists conventionally as a way of using logic to prove how it doesn't exist in this ultimate way. The aim is to realize emptiness, but the method we use is to think about dependent arising. Dependent arising is what we have to squeeze our brain to think about, which leads us to the conclusion, therefore there is no independent thermos, no inherent I. The thinking is dependent arising. There's other thinkings as well, but this is the king of thinkings, the king of logics. So this is like the middle argument about the parts. I always use the example these days of you go to IKEA and you buy a table. You see the pretty picture. But what you get when it gets delivered, that is a box with many bits and pieces. It's almost disappointing, isn't it? You visualize your delicious table and what you get is 1,000 different parts, isn't it? So there's a really good example of dependent arising of parts. So you see the picture of table in the ad. But let's say you go to IKEA and you want to buy a Robina or a Kim or a Mary Ellen or a Jay. You want to buy a me. It's a good example. I like it. So you go to IKEA, you get your box and you bring it home. So now what you've got in that box, perfectly well, is probably thousands of parts. I mean, even the table's got quite a few. But listen to this point. It's a very useful point. We know for that table, for example, they don't just chuck in 5 legs and 2 tops and 47 screws and cross your fingers. It's very precise. You've got the exact number of screws, the exact number of legs, and you've got the instructions, and you're going to put it together to get your table. Now, let's think of the eye. You're going to have hundreds and thousands of parts. Well, what are the parts? You've got hundreds of parts of the body. You've got ears and noses and ligaments and muscles. Think of all the parts if you had to construct a person. Just the body. And then you've got the mind, which is the main one. And what have you got? You've got hundreds of parts of the mind. You've got anger and love and kindness and jealousy. The 84,000 delusions Buddha has articulated, and then 84,000 virtues that counteract them. Plus subtle mind and gross mind and all the sensory consciousness. You've got many, many, many bits of mind. So can you imagine you're constructing this person? Now, we believe, as we keep putting these pieces together, we have to now search for the main piece, without which it won't be a Robina. And that piece, we are looking for a piece that's separate, that is separate from the others, and it's a distinct piece, and that piece has the label I. We are convinced that there's one of those in that box. We are convinced, in other words, that there's a little piece in here, as my friend Pende says, walking hand in hand with the nose and the anger and the love and the kindness and the knee and the ligaments. We are convinced there is a piece in there called I. We believe it absolute, totally implicit, and have for eons. It's the central player in our head. So now, one of the arguments, this all sounds so ridiculous to us, one of the arguments to prove that not only isn't there a separate piece called an I, but you don't even need one. We've made it up. Literally. This is not the subtlest meaning yet. So one really good argument, which sounds so peculiar, I know when I first heard it, I didn't know what they were talking about. If something exists, you have to be able to point it out. It's got to be a thing, and it's got to be one thing. And then if you point about to another thing, there's got to be another thing. So there's got to be one thing or more than one thing. You can't have it both ways. So a simple example I like to use is I'll make a statement. I always use the same example. I don't know, I've got no possessions here. What have I got? Nothing, never mind. I'll tell you, I'll make a statement. I have a thermos and a tissue, okay? Now, analyze that statement, and you heard me say 3 separate phenomena, didn't you? 3 nouns. There's a thermos, there's an I. The I, the label I fits this one, doesn't it? The label thermos fits there. And the label tissue belongs. Now, we know this because we've all agreed. We've all shaken hands and agreed that's called a thermos, that's called a tissue, and this is called a person. So what I just mentioned 3 phenomena, didn't I? This is an easy example. Sorry. So if you, even as you're watching me, as I'm saying, I have a thermos and a tissue, straight away you're using your eyes and you're using your intelligence, and what you're doing is you're checking, did I speak the truth? If I just said to you, I have a thermos and an elephant, you'll feel sorry for me because you know I don't have an elephant. It's so clear I didn't speak the truth. So you're very pleased if I say I have a thermos and a tissue because you can see it's true. Oh, phew, she's telling the truth. Now, the point is this. Let's prove that there are those three phenomena. You have to point them out. You've got to, and in this case, it's a very simple example that they're both separate and independent. This is a simple example. So that means these three phenomena, you can point out three easily here because they're both separate from each other, but crucially also they're independent of each other. So a thermos will break, Robina's still fine. The tissue will be thrown in the bin, the thermos works fine. They don't depend upon each other for their function. So we know that's true. So it's easy to point out three separate phenomena, no problem. So I spoke the truth conventionally. Now I'll make another statement, and this gets a bit more nuanced now. This is getting to the point. I have a nose and an ear. Now, without analysis, you look at me and you can prove it's true. Look, there you go. No, we don't analyze. But the Buddha says we have to analyze that statement because there's a big mistake in there. And it should, if it's a true statement, it has to be like the first example. You have to point out three phenomena that are at least separate from each other. Check this out. We can point out the ear, can't we? Look, there it is. And a nose does not depend upon an ear for its job. And we can point out a nose that doesn't depend upon an ear, do we? So they're separate. They're dependent. They're independent and separate. But what about the third phenomenon called I? Where is the third phenomenon that doesn't depend upon a nose, that doesn't depend upon an ear? And indeed doesn't depend upon all the other parts. But that's what we're believing. In that box in IKEA, we believe there will be a nose and an ear and an eye. And we are convinced it is there. We act like it. We feel like it. We'll say, Mary Ellen will say, I don't like your nose, Robina. And I'll say, don't you dare insult me. She'll say, no, I didn't insult you, Robina. I insulted your nose. But we would laugh at that, wouldn't we? Because that gets us to think another view. This is the other extreme view we make. We either think there's an I in there that's separate from the parts, or we think, in that case, that there's all of me is I. All of me is I. So we have to argue with both of those. But let's argue with the first one first. You see, this is the point. If there is a separate piece called an I, like there is a separate piece called an ear and there's a separate piece called a nose, when the ear breaks, and the ear in the box breaks or it stops working, my nose is fine. If I say I'm in pain, and you'll be more precise because you're a doctor, well, which part of you, dear? My ear's in pain. My nose is not having any experience of pain whatsoever. It's fine. So in that sense, the ear and the nose are separate. And they're also independent. But what about the I? So the Buddha's telling us you will not find a separate piece. And what's the proof that there isn't a piece? Because if there were a separate piece called I, it would be like the nose. When the ear gets hurt, the nose doesn't mind, and nor would the I. It will be going, oh, phew, I'm glad it wasn't me that got hurt. Poor old ear. Nose is saying that. Oh, poor old ear, it got hurt. Left hand is not worried. This ear is not worried. Left toe's not worried. And if there's a separate I, it wouldn't be worried either. So this is now more nuanced. So this would prove that there isn't a separate I, but there is an I. But you can't separate it. It's different. An eye is different from an ear. It is different from a nose, but you can't separate it. Look at this. This is called a thermos, okay? We say, my thermos has a base. That is a fact. Now, that's two nouns. That means we have to find two nouns, two phenomena that are not each other. So you can take the base. I say, look, there's my base, this round piece of metal. Well, excuse me, it's just a round piece of metal now. But where's the thermos? You don't have a thermos, how can you? Because you cannot have a thermos without a base. So you can't separate the base from the thermos, but they're different, because a base is not a thermos. As Lama Zopa says, the base cannot be the label. Not possible. This is not I. If I say all of this is I, then my nose is my I. My ear is my I. Why would I say I have an ear? If ear and I are synonymous, they are one thing. One. You could never separate them. It is one. So I just have 1,000 parts then. I have 1,000 eyes. Or you can't have that. You just can't have. Why would I say I have an ear? Why would I say I've got an eye? You couldn't. You wouldn't. So there is an I, but you can't point it out. It is not separate, but it's different. The I isn't the same as the parts, but you can't separate them. So as Lama Zopa says, all this is dependent arising. And what is the conclusion this is leading us to? This is the whole point. This is the thinking that we have to do to prove the conclusion. Oh, there is no independent I. That's emptiness. So you don't have to go empty, 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 empty. You go dependent arising, and that leads you to the conclusion. Oh, I get it. There is no I from its own side. I see. Any questions before we go home? This is a little bit on emptiness. Not enough, but a little bit. So as Lama Zopa says, because emptiness and dependent arising are the two truths. And right now we have the wrong views. We're sort of over here with the wrong view here. When we hear dependent arising, we hear it as intrinsic and real and permanent and solid. When we hear emptiness, we throw the baby out with the bathwater and we fall into the abyss of the great mistake, as Tsongkhapa says, and we become nihilistic. Oh, well, there's no I, might as well kill myself. These are the wrong views. These are extreme views. So what we've got to do is start getting on track, bringing dependent arising and emptiness together, because that's the real middle way. When you're finally a Buddha, you realize simultaneously that dependent arising is emptiness and emptiness is dependent arising. That's the final middle way. So we've got to bring these separate things together. Then we're on the right track. I haven't said to what Lama Zopa is yet. I'm saying to you, I haven't yet come to what he said, but I'm just giving other stuff first. So when we start to be on the right track, when we hear dependent arising, that argument we were doing before, that's telling us, oh, I see, that means it's empty. And whenever you hear that it's empty, you're going, oh, I see, that's dependent arising. When you can do that as Nagarjuna, as Chandrakirti, as Tsongkhapa, as Buddha says, now you're heading in the right direction. If we see these as separate, which is the wrong view, we are lost. We are lost. Up the creek without a paddle. So as Lama Zopa says, when we've realized the emptiness of the I, the thermos, whatever, it's as if there is no I. What does exist is so subtle, it's as if there is no I. But dependent arising, there is an I. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't. So these two are the best argument, as Lama Zeshi says, the king of logics to prove. And there's that beautiful text by Tsongkhapa in praise of Buddha for his teachings on dependent arising. It was blissed out, you know. Any questions? There's more to talk about, but I left no time. I'm so sorry.
If there are any questions, you can unmute.
So Som's question. Now ask me the question again, Som. Or did that sort of answer you a bit? Did that help you?
Thank you very much. I think you answered it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, it's a tricky, subtle, nuanced one, and we kind of try to squeeze our brain because we think must be an I. If we think there's an I, what happens is we over-exaggerate it. Then we think there's no I, we under-exaggerate it. So that's what we run to. So it's a really nuanced point. So just to hear even that one means the other is very encouraging. And as we practice and study it, it'll get clearer and clearer and clearer. Do you understand, Som?
Yes, very much so. Thank you very much for answering my question.
All right. This is not even the subtlest meaning, okay, you people, but it's a really tasty way to do the breaking up, you know. The whole other way of talking is another whole discussion. It's about how merely labeled. We can't do that now. Maybe we'll do another course. We can just do that especially or something, Miriam, and we'll go into, maybe we'll use Lama Tsongkhapa's text and we'll go into it a little bit.
Okay, we'll arrange it.
All right, people, maybe that's enough then. I'm running out of voice. I'm sorry, I get croaky these days. I don't know why. That's because I shout all days. Anyway, let's finish, shall we?
Can we do the prayers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we finished our course, have we now, haven't we?
This is,
Okay,
yes.
good. So we think all this time we've been together, these different days, these different things we've discussed, this lam rim, this packaging of Buddhist teachings, to see if there's anything we can think about, to try and bring it on the earth, to make it real for us, to try and take it as our hypothesis, karma, impermanence, you know, other realms of existence, the mind, reality, delusions, all these things. Bodhichitta, emptiness, to see how we can put it into practice, you know. That's the main thing. One step at a time. Let's delight in what we've done.